my sons and I carved our names in a tree where we hunted, my youngest son Quinn and I. And so when I looked at it through binoculars, I knew it was just above that tree, which laid right down here in this little canyon here. Initially, it looked like it was fairly benign as far as it looked like it was pretty localized to that one spot. We watched it all day. And then we watched it all day, and I can't tell you which way it spread initially, but I can tell you that eventually it went upslope pretty rapidly. Later that day and the following morning, it went upslope. And I've been around fire enough to know that as these trees burn, pine cones and logs, they roll downhill. Right. So the fire has a tendency to go uphill, but as things fall off the trees, bark, and they get hotter, it's so steep here, everything rolls downhill. So eventually you're going to start, what goes uphill is also going to be started downhill. And then these canyons, really odd the way the winds will come through here. They can be relatively benign and almost just a slight breeze, and in a matter of minutes it can be whipping up and just have all kinds of whirlwinds. Being in this canyon, you can see the trees blowing one way when we could still have live trees, and then on this side it's blowing the other way. So you get these odd divergent winds in here that are pretty strong, and I imagine would make firefighting pretty difficult. We recognize the fire danger from the Forest Service, that they weren't going to be able to do much or didn't do much because it's a wilderness, so I recognize there's limitations. But what we did do is treat our borders by cutting a fire line alongside of my borders with as best I could. I couldn't cut it up here because it's too steep with the cap, but on my areas that I could, I treated that and made and cut the ladder fuels so that the fires wouldn't be as severe if they did come onto us. We did everything we could to prevent fires. We did juniper removal. We just finished one before the fire. We did setbacks. We did everything we could, and still it just raised us. It hadn't been thin. Most of it being Forest Service property, and you're in a canyon. It's a giant canyon. Yeah, it looks like funnels wind, funnels fire. If you look, the timber that is alive, which isn't much, is the timber that we had on private land because we treated for it as best we could. Even in this kind of catastrophic environment, the bulk of the timber that's alive is on private land. We did what we could to protect it, but if they would just be a little more proactive, in particular on these areas that are adjacent to or adjoining private land, we'd be I think they'd be significantly ahead of the game rather than waiting for a fire to come and then all of a sudden everybody throws off their coats and now they're firemen. So there's very little of the strawberries that are left that haven't burned. And what you had was a pretty pristine wilderness that didn't have it really had a pretty small human footprint on it other than Strawberry Lake and some of those areas that were immediately adjacent to roads. The wilderness itself saw very little activity, but it was a gem for this community because you'd hear people talk about the strawberries and about coming to visit it and seeing some of the great lakes and some of the tremendous vistas, as you can see from right here. It was just incredible. And now I think that one of the maybe the misgivings of or misguided policies have allowed it to burn because again we let these fires burn. I think that idea of not bringing as much resources to something like this, a fire that's on the verge of of really what is a national treasure, publicly owned treasure, is unfortunate.